exploring small moments of lasting impact. It's the Atomic Jolt podcast with your host, Martin Cartledge.
Kylie Stewart, first and foremost, thank you for being here. We somehow through Twitter, I don't remember. I think I reached out to because I was interested in tech meetups in Denver, and then you kind of came out of nowhere and was like, "Hey, here's all these things." And then after that, yeah, it was just casually mention or or it was a Twitter kind of mutual following after that. But yeah, the internet is strange.
I feel like a lot of my friends in tech, I exclusively know through Twitter. I even have somebody that's in town over the weekend that we're going to hike tomorrow, and I only know them through Twitter, tech Twitter specifically. So yeah, definitely not an uncommon case, I think. But I want to say I was doing a lot of the meetup circuit back pre-pandemic times. I definitely don't know where that's at this point. I think things are still running, but I don't know if you've been to anything in a while.
No, I feel like most people, I think I tried because they obviously went to a lot of virtual stuff in 2020, earlier on in the pandemic. And I tried that for a little bit, but I don't know about you, but it was hard for me to feel as engaged. And I feel like I still met some people, but it just wasn't the same as being there kind of in person and kind of, I don't know. It's just different. It's a whole different feeling.
Even all the different softwares they've tried, the little icebreaker, round robin, we all go into little groups. You still get the one guy who's going to talk over every single person. It's just not the same. You can't walk away from a conversation like you can at a meetup. I think that was one of my favorite things about those.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's cool that, now you're the second person that I've had on the podcast that I met through tech Twitter. And I'm really not on Twitter that much anymore, except for the podcast, largely ironically because of tech Twitter and how exhausting it is. And so it's nice that there's been some positive stuff. There can in fact be positive things to take away from it, turns out.
Right. Turns out.
But yeah, cool. So we're going to be talking about hiking. You live in Colorado still, correct?
I do. I'm in Georgetown, so west of Denver by 40 to an hour, 3 hours. Right now, I can see I-70 from this window. So,
well, cool. So let's back up a little bit. The little things I do know about you is you went to, when you were getting into tech, you went to a kind of a tech boot camp, and that was in Arizona, right?
Yep.
Okay. And are you from Arizona, or where are you originally from?
I just happened to be in Arizona. My mom had moved down there, so it was convenient. I originally moved to Denver for an AmeriCorps position, which is essentially the American Peace Corps, kind of volunteer based. And I was working for a low-income housing nonprofit as a volunteer coordinator. I started learning JavaScript and then Python and how to automate some of the processes that we were using Google Sites for. And then I learned that there is a boot camp that will teach you JavaScript, specifically React, which I had known from my Tesla days. So it was just kind of all worked together as this might be a good opportunity to take up. I was bartending otherwise. So it was pretty good level up, I'd say, from where I was.
Yeah, absolutely. So zooming out a little bit, tell people that are listening that don't know much about you, I guess, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm originally from the East Coast area. I honestly flipped a coin in 2014 to visit either Maine or Colorado. I wanted to go to one of two national parks. Visited Colorado and just fell in love, kind of wanted to move here as soon as I could. Used the AmeriCorps to get here. And the boot camp thing happened. I was actually part of the first iteration of that boot camp in Phoenix. So it was really interesting to go through. And then I picked up a job at a JavaScript consultancy working for their Phoenix office. I was able to then transfer to the Denver office maybe 6 to 8 months after starting there. And then I haven't left Colorado since. So I want to say I got into hiking the first time I moved out to Colorado, which was 2016. And just leveling it up every year to the point that this past year I was doing scrambles and alpine peaks, 14,000 foot mountains and stuff like that. I feel like that kind of covers the story to at least where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, man, a coin toss between Maine and Colorado. Hindsight, I'm context, I'm basically from here. I've lived here since 1996. And I had some, I guess I'll call it sabbaticals. I lived in Portland, Oregon, and Phoenix also for like
Nice.
2 years while my wife was finishing up a master's program there. But mainly been in Colorado, but I just went to Maine for the first time last summer. And man, hindsight, I wish I just would have, like moved there a lot sooner and like lived there somehow. But then Colorado's also great, but
Right.
coin.
I want to
That's
say
not a
housing
bad
was
coin toss.
probably comparable back in 2016, but now I'm pretty sure Maine would be cheaper by a good amount.
Probably. Yeah. Not a bad coin toss though.
Right.
So hiking, I know it can be kind of like more of like a broad topic, but I know a lot of people, especially in more outdoorsy states like Colorado, treat it more like a hobby, but it's a lot more than a hobby. It can be like really fulfilling. And there's a lot of networking opportunities. I can imagine it's like a multifaceted hobby, I think. Do you feel like, because it's such like a general kind of generic almost activity, like with like really no like low friction to get into, growing up, what was the role of hiking in your life? Did you do it often, or was it kind of like a passive thing, or was it kind of something you found out like later on?
It was definitely something I came into way later. Growing up, the trails that were near us were like the Great Falls State Park, which honestly was just a place that teenagers would go to cut class. Like it wasn't really hiking, you didn't put on a pack. You could do it in flip-flops, just go see like a little watering hole or something like that. And that was the extent of it. I wasn't looking up trails. I was just going with my friends to areas that they were familiar with. And sometimes it had a really beautiful payoff, and sometimes it was just right along the Potomac and kind of gross. So I didn't really have like a passion for hiking. I certainly wouldn't call it anything like that growing up. And I wasn't raised outdoorsy. My dad was in politics. My mom was very corporate. She ended up moving into like yoga and being an author, but that still didn't contribute to like, let's go camping. I think they're both kind of appalled at how much I like camping now. My fiance and I like go off the grid for like a week or so at a time. And they think that's so strange considering I have always worked in tech. I worked for Tesla Motors. I've always kind of been in the city. And I've been moving further and further away from that as I get closer to the mountains, I guess. But I think, like you were saying, it is common enough out here. I'd almost call it like a hobby comparable to going to the bar with your friends. Like you would just go hiking and then maybe grab a beer in like a mountain town on the way back. It just was so comfortable to do when I first moved here, and all of my friends were just people I had known from the East Coast. It was like everyone was doing it. So you just kind of got comfortable doing it. I adopted a dog too, and he was a very high energy mutt. He's like a husky Dane mix. And he was probably only 7 or so months when I got him. So he needed a lot of exercise as well. And that was another thing that kind of led me out here more often. Honestly, last year I started freelancing, and I was able to kind of leverage my hours in a way that would let me do things not with the crowds. So like working on the weekends and then doing stuff on weekdays. And that was where I really got to like, oh, you can do scrambles when you don't have a crowd around you. Like you can do some stuff that's really exciting and fully remote, but it just takes a little bit more work to get there, or a little more research to understand.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure freelance definitely helps. So you said you kind of made the move over to Colorado in 2016. And that was at the time you were like working for that consultancy in Denver, and like kind of like just kind of experimenting and finding your way with like starting to hike more and like meet people and kind of get the lay of the land of Colorado. Do you remember like the first few hikes you did that kind of like, it kind of maybe made you pivot from hiking as something people just kind of do to something that was you grew more fondly of?
I distinctly remember my first hike on my own here in Colorado being St. Mary's, and just seeing a bunch of people and, really crowded lot. Depending on the time of day you're going, you're competing with a lot of other folks. And then contrasting that to my first 13er, which was Mount Snicktow. And just the level of preparation and thought that went into that being so different. I don't know that it was necessarily like one day I decided I'm going to start reading books, but it was definitely like discussing routes, talking more about like more extreme goals. My first 14er, honestly, was just me going up with my boyfriend at the time on July 4th. He was like, this will be really fun. He's born and raised here up in Longmont. And I definitely didn't know what I was getting into. But like in the past year, he would also tell you, I know far more about the mountains, the ranges, different, like the prominences, which peaks have suddenly qualified to be a 14er. It's just funny how I want to say I got more familiar again, the freelancing. But I don't know what like the full defining like hike was other than Mount Snicktow, and realizing that there are 13ers all around there. You're looking at another 14er. Wow, I actually can identify what range I'm standing in and what is visible around. And I guess maybe doing a class 3 is another way to learn that the exposure is very real. Leveling up does require a little more facing your fear. But at the same time, when I was on Long's Peak, I was passing people that did not have helmets. They were wearing just regular trainers, and they were visiting from out of state. And they're like, "Oh, is this something that people do?" It's like, we're all up here on the trail. Like, of course, this is something people do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how many different experiences can bring you into the outdoors here. Like even Long's Peak, class 3, you should have a helmet, but apparently plenty of people do it without. My friend sent me a screenshot of Google saying that Long's Peak was kid friendly just last week. So it's common enough.
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't call it that, just to clarify. It's got some tough climbing. Maybe looking at it as kid friendly, but taking that route is not something I would qualify as kid friendly.
Yeah. I think that a lot of that kind of stuff comes with just living in like I said, I've lived here for a really long time, and seeing how popular, like the rise in popularity and just so many visitors and so much tourism, which, I'm grateful for, because I think in a lot of ways it stimulates the economy and it's great. I mean, of course you want people to visit here, and that's awesome. But I think that's definitely the darker side of it, of people not really fully understanding, not having situational awareness or context about very potentially dangerous things, especially 14ers.
There's almost like a level of safety they expect by recreating in a national park. You just feel more comfortable because you're within the limits, but you can still get into some really extreme stuff within the national park.
Absolutely. So you talk about getting more into it and the planning, preparation, challenges, facing fears. How much of that do you think was just kind of your personality that hiking just kind of brought out of you? Because I know you worked in tech, and so I think there are some parallels there of, like being out of your comfort zone, challenges, preparation, etc., in a more generic way. Do you feel like that was something that tech kind of empowered you to do so more, or is it something part of your personality?
I had honestly never considered the parallels between tech and just the kind of constant need to, look at a new thing, challenge yourself, pivoting to the new tech because it seems interesting or it just is something you're able to run on. I was a long distance runner growing up. I did a lot of it would just be how I got out of the house. Something, the more you do it, you get more into it. And I want to compare a lot of the hiking that I've done, especially solo. I've done a lot of soloing in the last year, to that kind of same meditative state you get into long distance running, but mixed with really extreme views and really stuff you just don't see. Standing at 14,000 feet, you're above everything else. And the only thing that's at eye level with you is another 14,000 feet. Something about that just keeps, I can't leave it now that I've seen it. And I feel like a lot of people feel that way, but a lot of people also maybe don't want to push themselves to class 5 solo scrambling to get there. So there probably is something to say about my personality specifically being what drives me to get up to these things. I do have some fairly extreme goals in the Alpine here. And I have friends that definitely do these things with me, but maybe don't have the same shared extreme goal. There's probably plenty to be said about the parallels between tech. I've just never actually sat down and realized that I like to keep upgrading a challenge like that.
Yeah. And you also talk about friends that might not share as extreme of goals or be nearly as motivated by more of the extreme side of hiking and doing these kind of things. Tell me more about what the networking is like for hiking and this kind of more extreme side of it, because is it as easy as running into people happenstance when you're summiting a 14er, or is there a community online? What's that networking like?
So a little bit of both. My best climbing partner, actually, I'd say my 2 best climbing partners, I did meet in 2 different ways. One was online, Instagram. I was introduced through the Women Who Hike group here in Colorado. And then the other person I actually met on a mountain. We just happened to be, I was soloing a 14er that day. It was in the winter. So last March, actually, like almost a full year ago now. And honestly, you just suffer long enough. It was like an 8-hour day, just alongside these two individuals that were all post-holing. They were a little bit, they just had the best attitude. It was kind of funny running into people that you're like, I feel like I should be miserable, but we're all kind of having a good time despite sinking into holes that are up to our chins and then having to kind of dig ourselves out of snow, just repeatedly over and over going down the mountain. And I ended up partnering up with one of the people I met on that mountain, Luis. He ends up being the partner that I've taken up. I mean, we've gone on a bunch of different scrambles together. We did the Bells Traverse together. He just hiked with my fiance last week. They did another 14er together. I want to say that you really just meet people by chance. And then the ones that it's almost like finding a good climbing partner is very hard. Just to back up a little bit. It's not like you can just, every single person you meet in the Alpine is going to pair up really nicely. You guys can always climb together and it's always going to work out. Finding a partner that is like reliable, matched on skill set, communicative is really difficult. So sometimes you do meet these people in the forums and you try to do like a big group hike and then realize it's not quite for you. I think I've really just found like a few people that have paired up really nicely and we have a really good climbing style that works together very nicely. But I've met them all through just happen chance. Like it's all over the place. The forums are a really great place to meet individuals though. I see a lot of like almost casting calls for, does anyone want to partner up on a winter peak anytime soon? Or I have this skill set. Does anyone have a similar skill set? Would you like to pair up on something and try to challenge each other? And those are really good ways to find somebody if you don't already have like a good partner. But it is one of those things you want to hold on to those good partners when you find them.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm hearing, this is going to be frozen in time. And I was debating on even admitting this, but I'm just going to. So as long as I've lived here, I've actually never done a single 14er. And I definitely want to, but it's one of those things where life happens, things get pushed off. But the more I hear about what goes into it and meeting people and the challenges and everything else like that, it seems like there's a lot of universal takeaways as far as like making sure that you're matched up with the right person for the right task. And kind of like, it seems like having like pretty good intuition would serve you pretty well in this. Do you feel like you have pretty good intuition about this, or do you feel like you can only take you so far? Because I guess it also kind of sounds like it can only take you so far, and then the rubber meets the road and you have to see how they are in doing the actual task with you.
It's a little bit of both. I've definitely been burned a few times off of assumptions on a climbing partner, or there's a lot of ego. I'd say it's like a big and small community, and you get a lot of the same names and faces. And ego plays into that in the sense of, I've done this. If you haven't done this, you probably can't keep up with me. And that's not necessarily the truth. Like people that have never done a 14er, that doesn't mean they're incapable. I've seen people climb Denali without ever having stepped foot on a Colorado 14er. It's not necessarily the end all be all to a skill set. So you don't always know that the ego is going to come into play until you're on the mountain necessarily. I personally have a mindset of anytime I'm out there, I'm just feeling it out. May or may not get the summit. It'd be great if we did, but if something happens, if something changes, there's no reason for us to all suffer in order to get there. If somebody in my group wants to turn around, great, we'll turn around. If I want to turn around, I hope people would do the same for me. And I have run into, we need to turn around. People are throwing up. We're going to segment the group if we don't. And you get into, it's happened more than a few times now too, on like smaller objectives from like, we're really all suffering for like really 3 miles. There's no reason to do this. And that's stuff that you don't know until you're in those like high stress situations and you need to make the decisions. So I would say intuition gets you pretty far, but not all the way there. And there's also a lot to be said about like the alpine affects your brain differently. Having less oxygen can make decision-making a little harder. If you spend longer in a place than you meant to, maybe you're under nourished, you're not drinking enough water, you don't even realize it, but you're starting to hallucinate. And it's both a super casual thing that everyone kind of does and then goes and drinks a beer on the top and walks down. But at the same time, people die on the easy mountains. So there's something to be said about just like intuition can get you so far, but you got to really like keep the ego in check. You got to be with a good group. You've got to keep everything in play when you're on the mountain. But I will say I've heard the same kind of like my fiance, his family had done Long's Peak. His mom specifically had climbed Long's Peak. So he was telling me we could probably do it. She's never done a 14er before and she did Long's Peak, no problem. And it took us a couple times. Like we went up there, checked it out, realized this is actually really intimidating, went back down and had to try again with a little more preparation, realizing that like, just because, yeah, it seems easy, it's something everyone could do, you still don't want to put yourself into dangerous situations unnecessarily, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I find it surprising, but I also don't find it surprising that there could be potentially a lot of ego in that, because I think with something that's as extreme and like you said, like sometimes it can quite literally be life and death, that I would think that the elements and actually doing that task and like nature itself can be like the most sobering thing and can really just, banish ego from someone entirely. But it's almost scary that people can still have that in like the face of Mother Nature and things that are ultimately, out of their control. You can't decide if, there's inclement weather unexpectedly or things like that. I mean, Mother Nature can kind of trump anything.
You're not going to be able to fight the impending snowstorm, the crazy wind, and you don't realize how bad it is until you're standing in it. You're like, oh yeah, I could get swept right off my feet. These are the elements. I'm just a person. It's very humbling, but yeah, you don't always carry that away from the experience. I don't know.
Right. And you're talking about, I mean, like doing some hikes where you're like quite literally being sunk into snow and having to bear yourselves out of it, dig yourselves out of it. Yeah. Having someone with an ego doing something like that has got to be, testing patience, I guess, too. But again, to me, it sounds like something that, I mean, all like, even if they're like annoying or like kind of unpleasant experiences, it sounds like it ultimately teaches you regardless, because now I bet you're really good at finding these, like even the smallest signals and potential partners or people that you do this with. And, the littlest thing can probably set you off and be like, oh, maybe I should watch out for this, or, oh, maybe this person like isn't the best fit for my group or like for what I'm doing.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot to consider anytime you assess a new partner, but I would say it's gotten easier to see those things for sure, or where ego might come into play later. And keeping your own in check is also its own consideration. It's easy to think I've done this, or I did this last year, I could probably do it again. I'm personally recovering from, I had a bone removed from my foot, and I was fully immobile for 6 weeks. Been back to walking for about 3 weeks. And I keep falling into the pattern of, I'm probably going to be able to jump back into it. I live at 9,000 feet. Elevation's not going to be as big of an issue. And then you get humbled just taking the dog on a walk. So yeah, it's kind of an ongoing process, but that's one of the best parts, is you're forced to like challenge your own perception of not only yourself, but other people's reality almost every time you go outside. So I don't know. I don't see it being something I ever stop doing, even like a smaller capacity, maybe not 14,000 foot peaks at 50, but I've seen people do it. That'd be really cool. Yeah.
So, I mean, geez, with quite literally like having a bone removed from your foot and still having this outlook of, yeah, it'll happen, like just kind of like trusting the process, just like, yeah, it'll happen, just kind of being patient with it. I mean, clearly that takes a lot of dedication and you like it enough. This might be like an open-ended question, so answer it however you would like. But what I guess would you say you like most about hiking? Is it kind of the people you meet? Is it the task itself? Is it the kind of the lessons you've learned from it, being in these kind of crazy extreme situations? I mean, what do you like most about it?
Probably a combination of the second two things you listed there. The meditative state you get into, how you have like some of the best ideas in the shower. It's like that, but on a mountain. I've had full on like voice memos to myself of concepts to build out. Even in freelancing, it's just a good way to step away from an idea, a project, and just get your head out of it. I guess you could probably say running should be able to do the same thing, but that combined with the places you see, the stuff you learn, being out in that area, you're forced to consider geology. I mean, the mountains that are in the Front Range are different than the mountains in the San Juans. And at the end of the day, you're going to kind of wonder why that is, or at least I do. And then I tend to go down the rabbit holes of research and learning all of these things about the history. I wound up getting a book that was about the original summit survey of the San Juan County peaks. So it's like the first American government issued exploration into the San Juan Mountains. So he's just documenting what he sees, what he experiences. And it was really fascinating just to hear about like the electricity on top of a 14,000 foot peak being described by somebody who doesn't even understand what is happening when it's up there. Just all of the things that you can kind of take in when you're out there is a lot. I would like to say it's also the people, because I've met some of the best people that I know through this hobby. But at the same time, when I plan out a peak, I'm not really necessarily considering, like I would be happy to do it alone, or just my fiance and I, not like a big old group. There are a lot of situations where being in a group is really fun and camping is really fun, but I think it's been more of an emphasis on the location, the experience, just being in that wilderness. I don't know, there's something about being at 14,000 feet with like just you and mountain goats, and there's no one else back there. You can't even see other people. You can't even see other cars. And just considering that only a handful of people have really ever been in that same position, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah. And so do you think, I mean, you talk about doing things solo and that doing people with a group or with yourself, I mean, it depends, but you're happy to do a lot of this by yourself. Do you think a lot of that is because, I mean, do you think how much of that is like because of the pandemic and feeling like, I think most people could probably use more time just to like, I don't know, it sounds weird, but to like maybe be alone and to process things. And like you were saying, you know, just like pulling out a voice memo and like thinking through things or projects or ideas by yourself. I think it's pretty underrated. And I think a lot of people have realized that, you know, because we've all been kind of forced into it with the pandemic over the last year and a half.
Right.
But do you think you're more into the idea of doing things solo outside because of the pandemic?
Potentially. Maybe. I might have had so many bad experiences trying to partner up with people very early on that I'm at a point of like, if I don't need to share that space with somebody, you know, it's not meditative when you are just trying to get to know somebody. So it's not necessarily the time I always want to share with another person, but especially like a new person. Like I said, my favorite climbing partners are people that I've been able to repeatedly get out there with. I think that also implies we've had either just full silence and been fully okay with it, or the conversations are not, you know, what do you do for a living and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That might be the reason that I've been preferring. I do think I agree with you about the pandemic. I think we've all kind of walked away from small talk more than we need to. Yeah. And like you were saying about the meetups being over Zoom, I think a lot of us experience like Zoom burnout or introductory burnout, if that's even a thing, of just this like forced conversational state of like, we're all in this together. It's like, okay, but we can all suffer silently, separately as well. I want to come together, but at the same time, I do also like, it sucks for everyone. And sometimes commiserating isn't going to be the solution. It doesn't make me feel better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like being outside, and like I talked about this a little bit earlier about like Mother Nature being arguably one of the most humbling external forces that can be on someone. I do feel like, you know, being outside, I mean, that's why it's so popular for people that live here or people that visit here, of like just going outside and unplugging. And I do think that people are aware of what you were mentioning. I mean, Zoom burnout, and especially like in, you know, basically anyone that a knowledge worker that's now forcibly working at home with, you know, with kids or with their partners or whatever else, and having to like cram life into a living space. I think it's just almost compounded the burnout in general. And so I feel like, you know, the kind of things you were talking about of just doing things on your own and trying to chase more meditative type things. And it comes across probably as antisocial to some people, but I think that's a weird tropey thing to, you know, dismiss. And I do think that hiking in general, especially by yourself, I could imagine would be quite meditative and probably something that people can use more of. But I also think on the other hand, people are afraid of, you know, being alone and being, you know, I think there's also like a barrier that a lot of people have to break down of getting away from, the screen time and like the dopamine of the infinity scrollers that are on your phones too. So, I mean, how much of that kind of resonates with you and is true to you? Do you feel like, with working in tech, I'll just say personally, I think personally it's accelerated my burnout of screens and technology because I see almost behind the curtain of a lot of these things and how they're made. And so I think it's just accelerated my like, oh, I need to unplug, or I don't need this app or whatever else. I mean, what is that like for you?
I mean, very early pandemic, I was working on a food delivery service for like an app specifically to deliver fast food to people in different locations. So I definitely feel strongly that working, just like you're saying, working in tech, it doesn't necessarily need to be on the same thing that everyone's using at the time, but I do think that plays a role. It contributes to not wanting to be a part of it, like fully being kind of disgusted with yourself when you're looking at your phone for a few more hours than maybe you wanted to. Mm-hmm. When I was on the couch originally for my foot, I downloaded TikTok for the first time, and that was like, oh yeah, you can spend hours just scrolling. It's funny, but it's also entertaining, and you can get like the ski videos, you can get that whole massive internet filtered through. I understand now why everyone talks about TikTok being the way that it is, its own algorithm, everything else. Yeah, I definitely think I was very, very burned out September 2020. That's when I just fully left my full-time role. I had no idea what to do. I just felt like I was losing my mind. And I think a lot of people were in the same boat. But hiking was what got me out of that. It took maybe 6 months straight of controlling my own time, controlling my own clients, just figuring out what I wanted to do. And then spending maybe a whole week, there was a period of time where I was just down in the Sawatch Range, camping around and doing peaks for a week straight. I did 10 peaks in 7 days or something like that. Wow. And looking back, I realized I was definitely I was trying really hard to just get off. It felt better that I didn't have service. It was something that kind of motivated me to be out there. And then just like reading and sitting next to a tree stump was the most like meditative thing I could have done at the time. I'm sorry to keep throwing out the word meditative, but it really does feel that way when you're just sitting in nature and not listening to something, thinking about, your job, which felt like it was dominating all my free time. I'd be on a mountain like, oh, I actually think I know how I could implement this process. And it's like, no, just like focus on your environment. Took a good half a year to get to the point where I could actually just enjoy what I was doing and actually unplug. And then slowly getting back into ramping up my hours and working more. I'm trying to be mindful of like, it's so easy to slip right back into that and trying to avoid it. And I know a lot of other people working full-time, even if you take like 2 or 3 weeks between the jobs, it doesn't really feel like you get a chance to fully unplug. It's horrible. It just doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what the solution is, but I know a lot of other people have been echoing the same kind of sentiment. I've also had a lot of people like, you're lucky you don't have to work so much. Like, no, I'm still have to work. You still have to do stuff in order to do it, almost more so in order to plan it out. But yeah, I think a lot of people are almost suffering in their current role, but not really acknowledging how much it's taking away from them because we don't realize how much you could gain by not, I don't know, just working weekends. It'd be really cool if people could adopt a 4-day work week. That'd be great. Yeah, we'll see what the work trends look like 5 years in the future after all of this is over, when and if.
Yeah, no, I'm with you completely. And so you were like living in Denver, and you mentioned a while ago that you've been like just getting farther and farther and farther away from the city. Do you think that's like completely in parallel with like your outlook of your work and like the more you get burned out with like your previous work and more into hiking and the realization of this is way more like a conducive thing for my health, like mentally, and it makes me happier and everything else. Do you think there's a correlation there?
Absolutely. I was even just these past 2 weeks interviewing for full-time roles. And I don't know if you have been looking at the job market at all, but that Colorado labor law that we have going on has made it really hard for me to progress with any of the companies I'm excited about. A lot of them are just saying we won't hire in Colorado, check back in May. And then I had the whole thought of, do I even like freelancing is working. I can keep leveraging this. I can keep getting pretty reasonable hours. Is that even something I want, especially if it's going to mean long term, I can't be in the mountains in the area where I have these alpine goals. Technically, you can climb anywhere. Idaho has the sawtooth. You can go up to Wyoming, probably pay far less property tax and actually own a home instead of renting. And I just don't know that it's been something that's on my mind pretty heavily. Just trying to pair up with what could be a future in tech that aligns well with a life that doesn't burn both me and my fiance out. He also works in tech. He's a mobile engineer, and he's just been feeling the exact same way. Would love to hike more, but it's like, how much can you actually realistically do that? Yeah, I do think that moving further into the mountains has aligned with that idea, and the fact that more people are willing to help you work remote is really nice. But I will say mountain town internet is hard. Further remote you get, everything gets more difficult. I'm in a pretty commercialized rental unit out here in Georgetown, and we still have massive internet issues. And it's gotten to the point that I have to go to a co-working space in order to make sure I have consistent internet access, because sometimes satellite would literally fall down, and that means the signal's not amplified enough or something like that. So there's trade-offs to considering all of this. And in talking to companies, you always come across, would it be a limitation if we asked you to come back to the office? And that's something to always think. Like, I would love to live in Montrose. Ideally, we would live pretty far off the grid, or like Gunnison, which still has, a little downtown area, but realistically, these are hours away from Denver. And when you say Colorado, to anyone that's outside of Colorado, they think Denver. So it's, definitely hard to align. Like, you got to double down on one of them. And I don't know which, like, can we do outdoors tech? Is that an option? Yeah. I think a lot of people are in the same boat though.
Right. No, definitely. And it's to your point of people, like, jobs being like seemingly more so like getting more and more okay with remote work to attract talent, because I think that the pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes to remote work that maybe hadn't been doing it that much. I know previously I had been doing more of like a hybrid thing, so it wasn't full time. And so now kind of going into it full time, I definitely do see the benefits of it, especially now, like, being a dad, it's like, well, I like being close to, my family, and I want to not drive, to downtown Denver every day, because I live up in Erie. And so I'm like, so I think there's a competition there. Yeah. Like I did over the summer when they opened up the office again, and I did it like 2 days a week. And even that was like, man, why did I used to do this all the time? And so I think, off to your point of, finding that balance of being outside of those environments of high pace, high energy, also high burnout for a lot of people. I think there is a balance there. And it does sound like, in your case, it sounds like it's a hard thing to strike. And I think for a lot of people, it's hard to strike because, if you want to stay in an industry that you like, that provides like a pretty stable life for you and your family, it's hard to walk away from. But also there's logistical things that you're talking about of like, well, in the middle of nowhere, you're probably not going to get crazy screaming, fast internet. So how do you adjust to that? Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of just like, hopefully that the tech industry continues to kind of, I guess, like, evolve and kind of recognize, people as people, and less as like a fast moving technology, this stupid grind culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people found themselves living, breathing, and eating tech. I know personally, I was walking from work to a meetup that was a block away, and that would be, no issue for me. But at the end of the day, I was doing like 10 hours a day of just dedicated tech time, and that's not necessarily the best thing to do.
Yeah. And I mean, same. I mean, and I hate bringing up, I keep bringing up the pandemic and everything, but
it's heavily affected everything in our lives right now.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm just speaking from personal experience. It really, and hopefully for a lot of people, I feel like this is the case, but I feel like a lot of people, it forcibly made them check perspective and priorities in their life. And I mean, for like a lot of people, like I moved farther and farther away, not as, I don't live like in some place like Georgetown. That would be great. But I did move away. I was like, I don't want to be close to downtown Denver. I want to get there, but in a reasonable time, but I'm like tired of like even traffic or any of that stuff.
Right.
And I feel like that's a trend. I mean, circling way back to like Maine, it's like I look at that sometimes and I'm like, just daydream about I could just live in just a small town there of like 5,000 people and I could probably still do my job. But yeah,
My dad was
I
even
digress.
telling me how much he will save in taxes moving from Virginia to Florida. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's significant. That's not insignificant, just on taxes alone. Like, funny that just within the border, it's different. Or to
Yeah.
think that, yeah, I could make a really good salary with a big company outside of Colorado, but like then you give up Colorado. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's trade-offs to all of it. Something I've been thinking about a
Yeah.
lot lately.
So I'm not sure if you and your fiance are like will ever have kids or have a family of your own, but and so it doesn't have to be kid specific, but I'm mainly interested in with like all of these kind of life experiences over the last few years, especially with a pandemic, experiencing tech burnout, but then like kind of growing and fostering this love of the outdoors and hiking and all of like the awesome things that have come along with it. I mean, how will you or do you currently kind of share this with friends, family, or a family of your own one day? How do you, kind of what's that role in your life? Are you like a huge advocate or like what is that like?
You're asking how which part plays into family? I'm sorry.
No, so like it's obviously a big part of your life. And so,
The
you say
hiking
like here,
specifically.
yeah,
Yeah.
hiking is like we say like your parents are like, like don't really get it. And it's just you were raised a little bit differently. And so let's say like if you have a family or if like you have friends that maybe aren't really super into hiking, I mean, how do what's that role of hiking like in sharing with them? I mean,
So that's something I've
what do you tell them
already,
about it?
yeah, I've run into this one a lot. I actually, this, yeah, it affects a few different aspects. One example I can point to, we're eloping on a mountaintop next month. We're going to go
Oh,
up to
awesome.
13,000 feet, just the two of us and a photographer. And a lot of the consideration that went into that, we were like, would we like to have our family come up with us? Would we like to plan it for a time that would be easier for them to hike? They're not big hikers. Do we want to snap snowshoes on everyone's feet? There are, a niece. I have, well, actually, two nieces and a nephew in the mix. Would they all be down to hike up with us? Like, how big of a group? How small of a group? And we just narrowed it down to just the two of us so we could make it more about what we're willing to do and capable of doing and wanting to do. And then we'll have like a reception probably here in Georgetown or Idaho Springs with our family later, just rent a restaurant and do that. But that's definitely something that I think our families all almost expected of us. It turned into like, do you expect us to hike with you or are you guys going to do that on your own? We went back and forth about a big wedding, but it's something that the more of our family has found out about this plan to elope, the more people we're hearing that are like, yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of what we expected of you too. I've also found that a lot of our friends will say, would you guys like to hang out? We don't like, they'll preface with, we really don't want to do an intense hike, or we don't want to do a winter peak or something like that. And it's funny to me that people just assume we would force everyone to do the thing that we're doing, because that's just not how I view it. I want to do some extreme stuff, but I understand that not everyone should or wants to do that. It's not for everyone and it shouldn't be for everyone. Just the same way I don't expect to fully I'm not a beach person at this point. I was growing up. My mom would probably be appalled to hear me say that. I'm not a beach
Mhm.
person, but I wouldn't expect just because my friend is a beach person to force me to go with them. So it's funny that hiking has somehow become like, I would love to hang out with you, but I'm letting you know I won't do this. I'm like, I'm not forcing everyone in my life to do that. And then finally, I built a website specifically for my hiking photos. And then to summarize what I've done, because I found both my mom and my dad specifically don't fully understand any of it. I give them, text them the night before, give them an update of what I'm going to be doing. They look at my Garmin track, but I don't think it's fully like, this is what I'm seeing. This is the kind of move that I have to do to get up to that point. So documenting all of that and actually showing them what I've done, it's kind of funny to see like, oh, I didn't realize this was actually terrifying, or like some of the more extremes. So that's definitely been something I only recently came to terms with. You kind of, it's the same. Not everyone's walking in your shoes. You can't expect them just because you said 14,000 foot peak class 5, they're going to know that means a 30-foot chimney with a drop off. That's that's what that implies, not necessarily just another mountain. It's been enlightening on like all counts to just see the way other people interpret what you're doing when you triple down on a hobby like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm going to transition to like rapid round of questions. So the first one, we can't not talk about outdoors and hiking in Colorado without talking about like outdoor brands. And I know a lot of people are very, I almost want to say like just like almost brand advocates, and they're very like about the stuff they swear by and what they use.
Right.
So I mean, if we're talking in terms of like almost like a desert island, it's like a tired cliche, but if we're talking desert island, I mean, what would your favorite outdoor brand be?
Not to jump too quickly to this one, but Outdoor Research, I think by a long shot. They make so much stuff that I've been really pleasantly surprised with, like obscure little one-offs that I purchased thinking, this would be cool. It's on sale, whatever. And then it turns to be my favorite piece of gear. Most recently, they had like a winter sale, and they had this packable puffy beanie. So it's like the puffy, down-filled puffy material, but it's a beanie, and you can pack it into a little $50 size like pack.
Wow.
You can put it on a keychain if you wanted. It's so warm. It's amazing. There are so many times I've had a really hard time finding a beanie that I can camp with, and now it's like this somehow is perfect. And I don't think I've seen somebody make it, and I don't know why they made it, but I'm glad they did. Just a number of products that I've purchased from them. I've been like, wow, this material, I fully expected to rip my whole arm on a tree branch that I passed under, and it didn't. That'll, mark time in history. Like I thought I had ruined this piece of gear, and I get to keep it for longer. That's happened with a lot of their stuff. And then I can think of at least 5 other items that I really like that they've done. It's very cool. They do like experimental fabric blends and stuff, sometimes using like recycled materials. I like their stuff.
Well, there you go. Outdoor Research. I wouldn't mind if you sponsored the podcast. That'd be sweet. So If you're hearing that, please sponsor us. So I know you've probably hiked a ton. Like I've done so many different types of hikes since 2016, especially. And what's like the best one you've done, or maybe your favorite? I
can think of 2 things that stand out. One being the Mount Snuffles Loop. We just did this last July. My then boyfriend at the time, we went down to the San Juans. We were going to go visit a couple of the peaks, and we were attending a friend's wedding, and we decided to kind of dirt bag it the week before. So we were like car camping or just doing peaks. We ended up getting a KOA the night before their wedding and Telluride so that we could get a shower.
Nice. Yeah.
And it was just such a really incredible loop. You get to camp pretty high up. We had my 4x4. If we had it lifted, we probably could have gotten higher, but we got to like car camp at maybe 12,000 feet. There are lakes up there. We got a really beautiful alpenglow sunrise, a little bit of an inversion. We were the only people on the route before we hit the summit. It was just a really beautiful, complete day. But other thing would be the Grand Canyon in July, backpacking down to the bottom and then sleeping in the middle of July, 117 degrees overnight. It did not get any cooler. That was the coolest point. Yeah, it was honestly miserable. We were puking. My friend and I were just like crawling our way up. But we got out of it, and it's the most memorable trip I've ever been on. Really beautiful location, but July is definitely not the time to go.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. I've only been to the Grand Canyon once, and I remember looking down, and this is going to sound really like overly obvious, but it is so big. I cannot imagine like going down that sucker and then coming back up, especially in July.
We got our permit, and she was like, this is for today. You realize that you're getting kind of a late start. We're like, yeah, we're quick. So we figured we'd go the shaded route down because we're starting later. That means you're coming the unshaded route up the entire next day. And 7.5 miles doesn't sound like much. Killer, just absolutely killer.
Oh, I imagine that is intense.
Just into the ground.
You're right. Okay. So this might be tricky, but I mean, you've done several 14ers. I myself haven't even done one. I guess if you could just give someone like me a piece of advice, like what would it be for doing their first 14er?
Go for like a class 1, take it easy, and go really, really early, like earlier than you think is early, because it's always going to be crowded. And it seems like the crowds just get earlier every season. We did Bierstadt as my second peak ever, July 2019. And I want to say we started at 4, but on our way down, it was just a full, conga line all the way, like consecutive back-to-back people in a row crawling up the mountain.
Wow.
And you just don't want to be competing with that if you can help it.
Yeah, my mom has done a few, and she's always been like a very like early riser, like to an extreme level her entire life. And so I just thought it was like a mom thing when she was like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, me and my friends did one last summer, and we got there, we were ready, we were like on the trail by 2:30." And I was like, "You're insane. People
The
do
airport. It's like, no, actually 2:30 is not a bad time to start. I did Halo Ridge
Yeah.
last year, and that one was maybe 12 miles round trip, 12 or 14, I can't recall, but started at 2 and was done at like what I would consider a reasonable time. Any later would have been
Wow.
worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels very much like a mom thing, but once you compete in that little tiny parking lot with an RV for a spot, you're like, yeah, I wish I was here a little earlier.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, last one. If you I'm gonna like circle back because we've used the word meditative so much. This sounds like a very meditative type of question, but if you could be a wild animal, what would it be?
It seems too quick to jump to this, but mountain goat. They live in the craziest places. They get to do some of the most intense things. We were climbing Pyramid, and the mountain goats just follow you the whole time after you gain like the first saddle. And they were just around us, and they were like sitting next to the cairns, kind of pointing out. There'd be points where we're looking around trying to figure out what our next route is, and he would just be pointing it out. It's crazy to think they just live up there. That's just their world.
Yeah. Wow. I always thought that was just like a cliche thing you would just see in movies, and it wasn't, but it was something that like people just say, but it doesn't actually happen. So it happens often.
Apparently, some of the peaks, I think it's some combination of like lesser traveled enough that they aren't disturbed by people. Because certain peaks, there are too many people, like Grays and Tories. The goats are a little bit kind of standoffish. It seems like they might actually buck at you, but Pyramid, I think, is less traveled enough that they're just interested in whatever you're doing. They're going to follow you up.
Mm-hmm.
But I was appalled to see them kind of Sherpaing us. Like they're just, I want to say 3 different points that there was one standing next to the cairn. Like, do you guys see me? I'm right here. It's this way.
Wow.
Yeah. I had to take a video of it a couple times because you just can't believe it's real. Am I hallucinating?
Wow.
This is a real thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's my first thought would be like, wait, have I had enough water?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
when did I eat last?
Hold on.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So yeah, let's transition into plugs. I know you had mentioned your hiking photo blog, but yeah, tell us all about it.
I've been doing gear reviews and trip reports, and sometimes more like introspective posts on, I was like reflecting on 2021. Had a big goal of 1,000 feet. I wound up achieving it, and it was a lot learned from that. But also trip reports like covering the Maroon Bells, and then having really detailed photos of parts along that route, just in stuff that I've been trying to compile over time. So it's Kylie's .photos, which is a real URL. .photos is actually a domain name.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Kylie, for joining the podcast. It was great to actually meet you like face to face. You're a real person. I'm a real person. We've like actually met in almost a human way now.
At this point, this is pretty much human. The pandemic, sometimes you don't even meet your coworkers until ever.
Right. No, that's so true. I started a job in the middle of the pandemic, and I have only met 3. I've met 3 people on my team, and there's like 15 people on my team.
Well, here's hoping you guys can all safely get together at some point. But yeah, this is a human to human contact at this point.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks again. It was
good
talking with you.
No, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for joining the show, Kylie. It was great to finally meet you and to hear more about your passion for hiking. If you enjoyed the show and you're interested in supporting the show a little bit more, you can leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. If the podcast platform of your choice doesn't have reviews, you can follow us. That's probably the best way to support. If you're on social media and you're interested in following us on that, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Atomic Jolt Pod. That's Atomic Jolt POD. Thank you so much again for listening, and we'll see you next time.